So the goal here for the 2019 Poetry of William Wordsworth video supplement is to basically go through more of what Wordsworth was about. It's only about a paragraph, and then move into the poem London 1802. Again, written by William Wordsworth about John Milton, the guy that wrote Paradise Lost, this big, huge, famous poet. So during the course of the next, I don't know, 6, 7 minutes, I'm going to make sure I give you all of the detail. Now, watch the video, take notes on how I go through and present the material. You will be held accountable for this moving forward. So if there are any questions or comments or concerns, please let me know and we can move on from here. So here we go. Additional information about William Wordsworth. We know that he was born in 1770 and died in 1850. So of all the Romantics, he lived the longest and had the longest sort of career and impact on the major players of the day. English poet and one of the best known figures of the Romantic period. So he fits right in with the kinds of things that we've been talking about. Alongside Samuel Taylor Coleridge, William Wordsworth wrote the lyrical ballads, and the publication of this collection launched the Romantic period as we know in 1798. However, Wordsworth's most important work is said to be The Prelude, a semi-autobiographical poem that he wrote in his youth. This poem was revised several times, and Wordsworth worked on it during his whole life. So this is going to be our sort of the big consummate Wordsworth poem that we're going to be covering. We know that the Prelude was published posthumously after he died. So again, it kind of has more significance for that reason. As a central figure of the Romantic period, William Wordsworth focused his poetry on the personification of nature and its relationship with men. So, for your notes, Wordsworth is about the personification of nature and its relationship to human beings. Moreover, his poems describe intense emotions. Again, we called it the sensuous nuance in other material that we did last week. These are the main source of his aesthetic experience. So, the sensuous nuance, the aesthetic experience, the connection with nature. These are the major components that you're looking for in Wordsworth poetry. We also know that the past and nature are meant to be glorified by the use of spontaneous language in his poetry. So, again, there's a lot of sort of vague terms here that you're going to kind of become more familiar with as we work through these major poets. So we know that Wordsworth was a central figure of the movement. We know that he focuses poetry on the personification of nature and its relationship to human beings. To me, that means the relationship to human emotion. We also know that his poems describe intense emotions, and these are the main source of his aesthetic experience. Aesthetic is A-E-S-T-H-E-T-I-C, the aesthetic experience. The aesthetic is what we see and feel. So again, these are several notes that I think would be of value to have as we go through the poetry. So the first major piece we're covering here is London 1802, and it focuses mainly on the work of John Milton. So keep that in mind as you move through the particular materials. As I'm walking through the presentation of this poem, you should be taking notes on themes, on the major imagery, and on the details that I'm covering. So make sure that you have at least a page of notes per poem so that you can move forward with your material. So good morning and welcome to this presentation on William Wordsworth and specifically the poem London 1802. The idea here is that you review this video, you add the notes to your repertoire of Wordsworth poetry, and you complete any associated assignments with the poem as you complete this particular flipped lesson. So the poem is, again, London 1802 by William Wordsworth. I'm going to read it, but I want you to listen to the content. So if you don't have it in front of you, you can pick up on the major elements. When I'm done with that, I'm going to move into an evaluation of the major materials. I want you to also notice that it is a 14-line sonnet, just a different type of sonnet than we had covered before. So here we go. Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. England hath need of thee. She is a fen of stagnant waters, altar, sword, and pen, fireside, the heroic wealth of hall and bower, have forfeited their ancient English dower of inward happiness. We are selfish men. Oh, raise us up, return to us again, and give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. Thy soul was like a star, and dwelt apart. Thou hadst a voice whose sound was like the sea, pure as the naked heavens, majestic, free. So didst thou travel on life's common way, in cheerful godliness, and yet thy heart the lowliest duties on herself did lay. Now that's the poem, read capital letter to end mark, so it has a natural flow to the way that it is presented. So the poem London 1802 simply begs John Milton, the author of Paradise Lost, sort of the poet laureate of England prior to the Romantic period, begging Milton to return. It says that without him, England has turned into rubbish without literary talent. This is where we reference the idea of the fen, or the swamp. It states that he needs to return because we are selfish and need him to bring us happiness. So there is your theme. So make sure that you write that particular theme down in your notes. Now notice the bell just told me that it was 7:30. So we're going to keep focusing and moving on with this material. So here we go. The title, London 1802. This is the reference to place and time Wordsworth is referring to. He also makes us look at the date to realize that it was written 128 years after John Milton. So this gives us the opportunity for reflection on the impact of John Milton and what he's done for British literature. So you want to keep that, again, in your focus as you move forward. So I'm going to be cutting to some note screens here that has interesting information about where we are and what we're doing. So prepare for that. Take notes on how I walk us through the different portions of the text. So this last piece is what should be in your notes and a guide to what you need as a takeaway from London 1802. The second flipped lesson that you're going to see is on another Wordsworth poem and will be coming shortly. Now I'm sitting in the atrium finishing this up at 9:10 in the morning on Tuesday. So if you hear the choir in the background, you're just going to have to ignore that for the sake of the lesson. Now, the major theme of this poem, two main purposes, one of which is to pay homage to Milton by saying that he can save the entirety of England with his nobility and virtue. This is that romantic idea that poetry can save man from his own mediocrity. I think that's a significant concept. The other purpose of the poem is to draw attention to what Wordsworth feels are the problems with English society and where it's going and what is happening. So, in your notes, probably in preparation for a quiz, you want to be able to answer both of those particular questions. First purpose, how does he pay homage to Milton? Second purpose is how does he address problems with English society? More on theme. According to Wordsworth, England was once a great place of happiness, religion, chivalry, art, and literature, but at the present moment, those virtues have been lost. So how does the poem address those particular ideas? Now, I gave you some guidelines here. Wordsworth can only describe modern England as a swampland where people are selfish and must be taught about things like manners, virtue, freedom, and power. So how does Wordsworth address those particular concepts? Imagery of note. So if you take a look at the actual poem, And this supports the imagery that I talked about earlier in this lecture. Line 2 and 3, Wordsworth's first reference to nature occurs here. Wordsworth's striking metaphor of the country, which calls England a fen of stagnant waters. Again, what does that mean? Now, this isn't quite the floral sheet-filled idyll we usually imagine when we think of romantic poetry. This image of sickly, standing water shows us that there is something rotten in the state of England. This reinforces what I said earlier. Now, look up definition of an idyll. How is Wordsworth critical, even satirical, of the concept of an idyll in his poem? How is he critical of the concept of an idyll in his poem? Again, details for your notes. A third slide on imagery here is line 10. The next natural image is much more positive. Water imagery. Compare this to the fen earlier, where we talked about England being stagnant in religion, in literature, etc. How does it change? But it's a much better state. Wordsworth crafts a simile to describe Milton's poetic voice, comparing it to the sea. Now, of course, in your notes, what other metaphors and symbols might be prevalent in this section of the poem? If you can do this, I think you're in good shape. Lastly, in this presentation is the idea of literary devices. How does hyperbole function? How does symbol function? You guys are smart enough to figure that one out on your own. I do have one slide here about tone and how the tone works in the particular poem. So make sure, again, you can answer all of these different things. So, imagery, theme, literary devices. If you can do all that, I think you're going to be absolutely fine. So that should bring everything to a conclusion. Wordsworth, concerned with the direction ancient England is taking by the year 1802, wrote this poem as a reminder of what England has lost. He also presents a solution to this problem in the form of the poet John Milton. So, in your repertoire of things, this should be a significant guide in how to look at Wordsworth's poetry. So, complete this lesson. Make sure you get it done on time. And, hey, it's just more information we can conclude about William Wordsworth.